your affairs so that you just start being transparent, okay? And that's what will happen is you'll start to disappear. And the less you use that Social Security number, the more you'll disappear from their system. And this thing here, you can get CRA to help you with this. Well, I already explained how they do that in Canada. The IRS, unfortunately, won't do that. But again, you just have to know that it's a felony to compel the disclosure of a Social Security number. And I've got letters from the commissioners of Social Security that say they're not mandatory anyway. But matter of fact, I'll send you that stuff. I got that all digitized. If you need that stuff. Anyways, working alternatives. There are people who can get you set up with structures, trusts, and LPs, limited partnerships, so you can arrange your affairs to minimize your tax liability. And there's people that I use, but there's also local groups, okay, people that work together to do it, that use the same kind of structures, but it's just local people, and so then you just work together, okay? You set up express trusts and things like that, and basically the important thing to know is that the trust, if you get an entity that doesn't have an EIN number, then the IRS doesn't see them, okay? And like I've got an LLC in Arizona I manage, and it doesn't have an EIN number, and I use it for holding things, okay? I'll transfer things into it once in a while, like a car. I'll title a car. I'll have it registered in Arizona, and it'll be owned by this General Rainbow Enterprises. And I do what's called shoebox accounting, okay? So then the trust, you know, it's basically a ledger and a shoebox, right? And so when the trust makes money, you make an entry in the ledger and you put cash in the box. When the trust spends money, you make an entry in the ledger and you take cash out of the box. That's it. Because if you don't have an EIN number, you can't have a bank account. Okay, that's the problem. But you just do shoebox accounting. It's not impossible. It's a little bit more difficult, but and you have to get paid in cash all the time. But that's not saying you can't do it. And the company is a registered, legitimate company in Arizona. There's nothing they can say about that. And because it doesn't have an EIN number, the IRS can't see it. Okay, it's like it's non-existent, and it just carries on as per normal. And on the tax forms, all you do is you put on there if you pay it money, if you want to show that you paid it money. Well, first of all, an expense, a normal expense, you don't usually collect EIN numbers for normal expenses unless it's a quote-unquote employee. And so you can put it down. What I do is I put it down compensation for labor. And actually on the 1065 form there is a line, because my LLC, my best year, my LLC made close to $200,000. And it wound up losing it all. Damn, that's just not that good a business, you know. But I showed that it was compensation for labor, which was the big expense, which went to me, quite frankly. But compensation for labor is not a taxable event. I don't know if you're aware of that. There's Supreme Court cases that talk about that. That's the reason on the tax return they want to know what your occupation is, because if you're an engineer, a lot of people say, "Oh yeah, I'm an engineer." Well, you're not a laborer, so then you're taxable. But if you're a laborer, then that starts creating a murky area. You see what I'm saying? So anyways, you got to understand all these little tricks. Okay. There's also employee who do employee leasing. There's companies that do that. This is a company in Canada that I'm aware of, but they've been doing it for 30 years, and they haven't had any troubles at all. They charge a 7% fee, and instead of paying you the money, they loan it to you. And so it's kind of complicated what they do, but it's pretty slick. They've been doing it for 30 years, and they've never had any trouble at all. And so that's another alternative. They charge a 7% fee, and they'll set up structures for you and everything. So actually, their fee is probably the more reasonable than these other guys that set up the LLCs and all that, because they actually charge about they charge, depends on the cash flow. These guys that do that charge depending on the structures, how many you need and stuff, you might wind up spending $8,000 to $9,000 bucks. And you get basically a set of 3 trusts, and then you get a limited liability company, and they'll set up banking for you and all that stuff. But the other guys, this employee leasing, they do basically the same thing, except they structure it a little bit differently, and they charge a 7% fee. So, you know, it varies, you know, as to what's more expensive or less expensive. And these guys operate on both sides of the border. So you know, that's not a problem. Anyways, if anybody's interested in that, you can contact me privately, and I'll put you in touch with them. Some companies pay cash. I dealt with companies that pay cash. With my company, American Engineering Services, it's a limited liability company. It's got an EIN number. I don't own it. Okay, I'm just the manager. Okay, it's owned by a trust and another LLC, actually. And what happens is, so when it files taxes, it does a 1065, which is a pass-through. It's because it's set up that way. It's a pass-through entity, and so all it does is report. Okay, and that's it. It's really slick how it's done, I'll tell you. And I've been doing that for a couple years now, and it works pretty good. And actually more like about 4 years. That's how it works with that. But I've worked with companies that are willing to pay cash, and that's even better. Ideally, if like, that's one reason I do what I do here, where I ask for a coin first, and as an acceptable, as a less desirable alternative, I'll take the commercial paper, and I'm essentially saying that that I'm only taking the commercial paper as a last resort under coercion, basically. You see what I'm saying? It's not like I want it, and so, you know, if the IRS ever wanted to find out, which I don't think they would, because I've already sued them twice to the Supreme Court. I'm in the Supreme Court now again, second time with them, eh? And because what happened, if you think about it, in the Supreme Court, first time around, the U.S. Department of so-called Justice waived their right to respond, right? Well, that's admitting everything. That's saying that the IRS is a bunch of thieves, right? And then what happened is, because see, the Supreme Court, the Constitution says that the Supreme Court has to rule on a controversy, okay? Well, think about it. If the U.S. Department of Justice waives their right to respond, there's no controversy. It's all admitted. You see what I'm saying? And so, therefore, there's nothing for the Supreme Court to rule on, so then they dismiss the case. So it's kind of like a hollow victory for me. And so I figured, okay, well, I'm going to come around for round 2 here, and I'll go after the IRS commissioners and deputy commissioners, since they already admitted that they're a bunch of thieves. So I'll come after them personally, in their personal capacity only, okay? And so then that's what I did, is I brought it in the District of Columbia in their personal capacity only. And I said, and I went after the IRS, and I said in the petition, I said, you know what, all the IRS has to say is that they're not responsible for anything that these people did, and I'll let them off the hook. That's what I said. And so I'm just going after these individuals that are thieves, admitted thieves, in their personal capacity only, you know. And so, you know, now I'm in the Supreme Court again. I'm kind of an in-your-face sort of guy, you know. And I told them that I don't care. You go send your hired thugs over and have them take me out back and blow my brains out, because I'm not going away. And until I see some of these criminals do that little dance they do at the end of a common law rope. And that's what I tell them right in my paperwork. So anyways, you gotta, you know, I don't know if you want to be as belligerent as I am, but you know, you know, I guess it's just something that I've gotten that way over time, and I get tired of having to deal with these criminals. But there's a lot of alternatives, okay? This is about working. There's another thing about the Embassy of Heaven, that's a church in Oregon. There's a guy that I know in Ontario that registered his vehicle in the Embassy of Heaven, and he's been driving around for 2 years like that. And they come up and they sure check out his license plate a lot and all the rest of it, but they haven't messed with him. They haven't stopped him. One time he said a cop came up beside him. He was doing 20 clicks over the speed limit. He does that on purpose, okay? Because he doesn't want them to think